Hey, welcome back to my talk. Today, we're going to talk about the construction of Maya, which I'm referring to as holographic reality, quantum entanglement, and collective consciousness. Last time we spoke, we were talking about vibrational density and in different orders of magnitude and different dimensions in the cosmos, how they operate. We're going to be taking a little bit of a closer look at the dimension of reality we are in, which is on Earth, and how our reality can be manipulated in a more technical, fun way. So, the topics that we are going to be covering today are going to be on Maya, the Sanskrit term for the illusory nature of our reality, matrikas, asuras, those are two opposing forces, which I'll get into detail with, holographic reality and what that means and looks like, Indra's net, the concept of Purnam, which is Sanskrit for infinity, the infinite, nested infinity, and fractals as well, quantum entanglement, quantum coherence of our individual consciousness, as well as collective consciousness and the gravity of consciousness and how it affects our reality. So, first, we're going to start basic. We're going to start with the esoteric wisdom first. Here is Maya. So Maya is the illusion of relativity and duality. And if you can take it a step further, it means that the truth is that there's no duality and everything is really interconnected. There is a separation between subject and object. In simpler terms, it kind of looks like me and you are separate from each other just because we have different names, but truly we are part of one whole unity consciousness. There is a text called the Shiva Sutras. Now, again, this is based on Tantric philosophy, and the primary deity is Shiva. Shiva represents cosmic consciousness. And the sutras contain 77 aphorisms that provide three different forms of awakening to cosmic consciousness. We will be working with the first awakening and the aphorism, the second one, I believe, called Jnanam Bandha. Jnanam Bandha means differentiated knowledge is bondage. Undifferentiated knowledge is also bondage. So, more specifically in detail, if you say differentiated knowledge, it means I am this and you are that. We are separate. That's a very reductive way of looking at it, but it's just a simple example. Undifferentiated knowledge looks like being aware that everything is deeply interconnected and being aware that everything is one. What's really interesting is actually it's pointing out that both forms of these knowledges are a form of bondage because typically you would think that the universal set of understanding consciousness and true knowledge and true intelligence would be just undifferentiated knowledge, right? Because you don't do any compare and contrast. There's no difference, there's no relativity, there's no duality. Actually, that's not the case. What this aphorism is saying is that the universal set is actually the set containing both differentiated knowledge and undifferentiated knowledge, because this in turn ends up being the essence of non-dualistic thinking, which I think is fantastic. You need to be able to actually go in between the two realms, and that is how you can understand other people and yourself, because we make up the entire world. So, more specifically with differentiated knowledge, just so we can dive in deep with, because everything we're going to build upon is built upon differentiated knowledge. So it's anything that limits your perception. Yes, I mean anything. And it's not always fun, but like for example, if you strongly dislike serial killers, that desire to keep them away from your personal perception, like you don't want to be friends with one, is a form of differentiated knowledge. And that's why I said non-dualistic thinking also kicks my butt sometimes too, because unfortunately and fortunately, again, rising above that dualistic thinking, in Tantra philosophy, every kernel of existence is seen as divine, everything that exists ever, not necessarily because it's inherently bad or good. And I know when we think of divine, we think, wow, beautiful, angelic, but divinity is really just cosmic existence. That's it. But this divine existence is validated merely by the fact that it is allowed to exist. And allowed doesn't necessarily mean like you were given permission. Allowed means it just is. So it is a part of this cosmic atmosphere, which means it is seen as part of the divine existence and play. So differentiated knowledge is also what gives us our personalities. Like if you, very simple example, once again, if you decide to not watch a horror movie because it's just not your thing, you have limited yourself on your free will and actions that you will take, and you've created differentiated knowledge. You have said, like, if my name is Shivani, I am all movie loving entities except for horror. So you've separated yourself from something. And in that sense, that is also a form of bondage. So let's talk about the matrikas from a historical perspective. So you can see that these are seven mother goddesses. They are depicted as these energies, but they also are reflective and counterparts of male deities, and they are originally created by the deity Shiva. Now, hold on to the whole personified piece here, because again, this is a historical perspective, and everything I'm going to talk about when it comes to like mythology history is all one big metaphor. The Puranas, these ancient texts, fully developed the matrikas when they first came into existence and discussion. They were represented as like warrior goddesses who assist this god, main goddess Devi in a battle against demons or asuras. Again, just hang on to the fact that this is all a metaphor. Asuras are energetic influences that come from unchecked raw power, expansion, they can cause chaos, etc. So asuras and matrikas, they appear in ancient texts like the Puranas, the Devi Mahatmya. So around 600 CE, 900 CE, they come to light. So when I was talking about Maya in the slide before, I was discussing it as illusory reality. Things are not really what they seem. There's separation, there's duality, and actually the movie The Matrix was based on this concept of Maya. So if you're looking at The Matrix as some kind of computer simulation, then you can think of the matrikas as these vibrational like coders or engineers of this simulation. And now there are seven of them typically depicted. So these seven goddesses also represent qualities which may be familiar to you. So here are the matrikas away from their goddess perspective and a personified perspective and purely based on energetics. And I am now showing you the difference between differentiated and awakened knowledge in that perspective. So the names are Brahmani, Vaishnavi, Maheshwari, Kaumari, Varai, Indrani, and Chamunda. And what's familiar about this, obviously, is that it kind of represents the seven deadly sins that you would see in the Bible. And I think Christianity and its setup of the seven deadly sins came about 1200 to 1500 years later after this setup. And a lot of belief systems have their kind of own idea of what these things are like. But what is really different about this is Tantra philosophy being non-dualistic doesn't really call anything bad or good. It is the most, in its purest sense, the it is what it is philosophy. And it is purely dependent on context. You can see this clearly when we do a comparison between what can be seen as a deadly sin versus when you do shadow integration. One other thing I would like to point out is that the matrikas, like anything in tantric philosophy and mythology, is a fractal. They represent at infinitely large and small scales self-similar behaviors. So right now I'm talking about individual consciousness and how it shows up. This also shows up in the cosmos, which I'll touch on in the next slide. So I'm going to focus on individual consciousness for this slide. If you are somebody that has, greed and this obsession with gaining all of this wealth, you can become obsessive. When you do shadow integration, right? Shadow work is something that's been really popularized in the psych culture, mental health culture, right? But it's super important because this is a real huge part of who we are, and keeping things taboo, energy can't be created or destroyed. It's transferred. So just because we pretend it doesn't exist doesn't mean it's just going to go away. So it's really important to be aware of these traits so we can integrate them into ourselves, because just look at the mastery and look at the end result that can come from it. You're able to balance abundance and actually include a bit of generosity. You won't feel the need to hoard everything because you know there's an energetic flow of wealth. Likewise, Chamunda, I mean, this is a really big one, I think, for a lot of people when we find ourselves procrastinating. we find ourselves feeling lazy, and there's this sense of guilt when it's really probably nervous system rest we've been needing for such a long time. But society kind of can demonize that because if something doesn't look like you're hustling and grinding, it is not deemed worthy. However, if you are able to internalize this and gain a sense of self-mastery, you will find that embracing that emptiness, the quietude, the ability to just be human being, which I will come full circle on that towards the end of this presentation. It actually allows you to have enough stillness to embrace any cosmic wisdom, any ability to be aware of your environment. You have a more whole picture of how things work. And again, this video with the slide will be available on YouTube if you want to look at it more in detail. But I just think it's actually so incredible that there's this setup of things that are supposed to be considered bad, but there's obviously just an it is what it is philosophy, depending on how you choose to go about these qualities and energies. So I have covered the historical personified aspect of, the mythology behind the matrikas, and then even touching a little bit on our personal individual consciousness. So let's go ahead and take a look at how these entities can show up in the cosmos. So the matrikas actually serve to provide a vibratory boundary. They are boundaries around our reality as we see it. How this reality looks, I'll touch on more. You can think of the matrikas as like modulators. They are able to change or control a signal, wave, or vibration. So if Maya is this reality that we're in, illusory reality, the matrikas would be kind of in control. And again, they're discussed as if they're people, but I just don't have the vocabulary to talk about them as just pure energies, and it can be a little difficult to wrap our minds around, which is why I am personifying them, just like mythology does. Because remember, just because people didn't study science and math doesn't mean that they weren't allowed to have access to cosmic truths, which is why they go approach this with storytelling, something that's actually very educationally accessible and relatable. So, what does this tell us? So asuras are like we looked at before, they're demons. And we'll look at the I guess the irony of it, where it's like they're considered demons in mythology, yet they need matrikas, which are something that represent kind of the negative qualities or aspects of humankind. Yet in this situation, they're considered good. Why is that? So if asuras are raw, unchecked energies of expansion, then matrikas are a form of structure and differentiation to hold them in. So Shiva represents all of cosmic consciousness, the vibratory field of universal set of all consciousness in the cosmos. If you're new to tantric philosophy, just a quick breakdown, but the Shiv field, the universal field of consciousness, is where everything in the cosmos emerges from. The Shiv and Shakti side is respectively Shiv being the observer state, pure stillness, consciousness. Shakti would represent the expressive, creative, and energetic force. With the formation of the cosmos, there came an expansion. And we just really want to think about, I'm going to discuss negentropy and entropy. Um, what I want to really talk about is asuras being raw, unchecked energies of expansion. So when we think about the Big Bang, eruption and everything in the universe is like expanding, expanding, expanding. Okay. And there's this idea that this energy is the Asura energy. It's moving, moving, moving really, really fast. And if it indefinitely kept going on like that for all of time, there would be no real universe with structure or form. It would just be chaotic, and then the universe would dissolve, and that's it. What this is actually saying is when there was the Shiv field, oh, Haryank, you might want to mute yourself. But when there is the Shiv field of universal consciousness and there is an emergence that comes from it, then you are now dealing with stillness and creation and movement. You can think of this like a sine wave. So when you're moving like this, right, the top and the bottom of a wave, the crest and the trough, they represent the Shiv state. So when you start from stillness, like before the Big Bang, that would be the Shiv state. The inflection point would be the Shakti state, the divine feminine. Actually, that is the true essence of divine feminine. It's just really misrepresented in culture. But when you finally take solidified form, that is another form of the Shiv state. And this oscillation continues and continues. But any movement that's happening in between states is that Shakti state. Shakti unchecked turns into an asura. Shiva, in its limited perception, turns into matrikas. This is why we are able to have a net positive entropy in this universe. There's always balancing forces taking place. So for you and I to be able to have our heart rates working at a particular rhythm, for us to be breathing in a particular way, anything that we do that seems organized in our systems, like our immune system, I mean, the name is there, right? We have different systems in our bodies, which means there's an organization, there is an order to it. But for every order that exists, there is a level of chaos. So that is how we balance forces in our universe.
Hi, this is editing mode Shivani. I want to just really clarify my position on how matrikas actually end up creating form and structure of our reality of Maya, of our holographic reality that we interact with. And I think it's just really fascinating that it was a way to have order and structure in things, which actually makes a lot of sense because the aspects they describe that seem negative, but when integrated with shadow work are a form of self-mastery, they're still a form of differentiated knowledge. Differentiated knowledge is, as we will discuss or have discussed, represent you having a particular personality and separating you between that and that which is not. And that is how they were able to have a battle between asuras and matrikas. Again, it is a mythology, but it is definitely a metaphor for when you have expansive, unchecked power that could result in chaos. Matrikas come in and actually, with their differentiated knowledge and understanding, create that vibrational boundary around our reality. Back to the slides.
Oftentimes we just think about Maya and the Matrix and how to like exit it or, whatever. I'm not talking about that. It's actually a really silly conversation and it takes away from the gravity of seriousness that it comes to when we are wanting to change our lives. So you can never really escape Maya. As long as you're alive, you're in Maya. There's no exiting the Matrix. You are always in it. It's just changing your reality within it, right? So what happens when we combine the vibratory modulators with the actual holographic reality of Maya, the illusion? What do you get? I just said it in the name. You get a holographic reality. Sorry about that. But going more into it, we know that from physics that electrons repel each other. There is no true touching of anything in our reality. We're never really interacting with anything. If we were truly touching, it would go more into our molecules fusing inside of objects, which I don't know about you, but that does not sound fun to me. Now, and what we know about quantum mechanics is that our entire reality, decision making, what's happening next, etc., is entirely predicated on everything operating on a wave function in superposition. So it really begs the question of whether everything is as it seems, considering that observation is what collapses something into its final form. Okay, so we kind of have this idea that we don't really touch or interact with anything in our reality. Then we also have this idea that nothing physically exists in a sense in some situations, unless we're like actively observing it, right? So we're gonna just hold on to that real quick because we need to complete this thought, but we need the context of Indra's net and how a hologram works. So we will be back after this little commercial break. Beautiful Indra's net. What is it? So recapping from, I believe, the last talk, I'm going to attempt this word, but Pratitya Samutpada is a Buddhist teaching that states that everything is dependent on everything. Nothing exists independently. It's also known as dependent origination or dependent arising. So, just think of it as a graph, nodes, all of that. If you pluck one out, then the surrounding ones would also fall down. And because those surrounding ones fell down, then the ones surrounding that would also fall down. Everything is important in this reality. It is not just to make you feel better, but you are a part of this reality. And quite literally, without you, other things start falling apart that are in independent origination with you as well. Indra's net demonstrates this concept of illusion, dependent origination, and interpenetration. Another quick example is I've used this before, but like a seed resulting in a tree when it grows over time, it's not just that simple cause and effect. And there's even this idea that like cause doesn't create effect, that's like a temporal space out. It's this idea that like they kind of exist together because you can't have the effect if there's no cause. What's the point of having a cause if you don't expect an effect? So they don't exist independently either. And also, there are multiple other factors affecting the growth of a tree, from atmospheric systems to animals and their intermingling with the ecological systems, etc. And Indra's net also illustrates this idea that appearances are not reality. It is just a reflection. It shows the dual importance as well of you yourself in this net, but also how you are connected to the collective, to all of the rest of reality and everything conscious within it. The net has supposedly, in mythology, an infinite number of jewels, one at each crossing point, like the whole graph thing I was talking to you guys about. And each jewel reflects all other jewels. Remember that we're going to touch base on that later. The net's infinite reflections do create like a tesseract, like fractal like structure. So now we're going to quickly take a look at how holograms work, taking it back to school here. So a hologram works when you use lasers to record light waves in a special way. This laser light is split into two beams. One beam shines directly on a plate. You can think of this as a mirror that is recording light. The second beam will bounce off of an object like your face and then back onto this plate. So when these two light beams meet, they create an interference pattern. So just interference pattern, squiggly lines, waves, and it is storing all the light information of the whole object. So this is why you are able to kind of get an experience with a hologram, not with a painting, because a painting doesn't store light waves. You feel me? Like it has a solidified color form, but not the actual interference pattern, which makes the environment more interactive. So when you shine a light on the plate later, the interference pattern bends the light to recreate a full 3D image of the object. And this idea that's very important, very similar to what we just saw in Indra's net, where one jewel reflects all the jewels, a hologram suggests as well that every tiny piece of a hologram contains enough wave information, enough of an interference pattern to actually recreate the whole picture of reality. It's just at a different angle. It can also be kind of fuzzy. It's not going to be the most perfect look, but basically, anywhere you are in space in a hologram, you will have the ability to access the whole entire picture and the angle because you have wave data, not just a like two-dimensional photo or two-dimensional image, sorry. So we're going to combine how a hologram works and Indra's net back to Maya or holographic reality. So, considering that Indra's net finds holes in the concept of reality being truly deterministic and solidified, we can test the assumption that everything arises in relation to something else. Reality is not as fixed as we claim for it to be. Something also behaving deterministically is still within the time frame of human life expectancy. And if you're not familiar with the term deterministically, determinism and being stochastic, they come from thermodynamics, and determinism is more like behaving in an organized way, a definitive way. Stochastic is more probabilistic, disorganized, more chaotic. And there's this idea that at large scale systems, the universe tends to self-organize. You can think of our solar system, for example. It has like almost this deterministic behavior, right? We haven't just gotten kicked out of our orbit yet, but like at really small scales, you see, quantum mechanics behaving in superposition, and you don't know what's going to happen. And I really want to touch on this thing of human life expectancy because all of our science and math, all the STEM fields we used to study are coming from the human origin point, which makes sense because we're trying to understand our world in a way that affects us and us alone, and maybe our pets and maybe plants and other things that we love, but still from the perspective of a human being, right? Like there's this concept of quantum tunneling. It's something like if you have a desk and you're like tapping your finger onto it, and you did this every day for every week, every second, every hour for a year, then a decade, then multiple decades, and your life expectancy is 100 years old, then you would believe that this solidified desktop, this form, just you can't go through it. It's solid. But the thing is, everything exists in probabilistic states. So nothing is impossible, which I really find interesting in studying tantric esoteric philosophy and quantum reality. It's really just extremely unlikely that your finger would go through a desk. But hypothetically, if you were going for like several centuries of poking your finger on this desk, there is a chance your finger would go through it, right? So when we think something behaves deterministically, it's because we see it taking its finalized form and interacting with human beings in this way as per the timeline we see fit. Okay, so now that we've discussed holographic reality, I'm going to touch on the concept of Burnham, which is the tantric or Buddhist philosophy of nested infinity, infinite fractals. So we know that in a hologram, no matter where in space you are, you have the interference pattern to be able to get the picture of the entire whole. So if every slice of Maya, our cosmic holographic reality, is always going to give a picture of the infinite form of our holographic reality, just at a different angle, this means you also hold this. You are an active participant of this reality. If you are alive, then it is happening. So, kind of going back to what I said before, where, you know, we don't like to use the word divine and it feels magical and this and that. Like, really, if you just exist, you are an active participant in this reality. You are one of the jewels in Indra's net that has access to the infinite jewels available. What does this mean if you take it one step further? It means you actually hold the infinite within you. Right? This is why so many people talk about when you're trying to look for answers externally, all of that exists within you already. Your unique signature in space is what is going to really consciously co-create in this reality and why your angle is quite literally extremely important. Regardless of what limiting beliefs you may have about yourself, about not being important, your perception of the world not mattering, actually at like a very philosophical and scientific level, it does. And that's why when I mean, at least for me, personal example, if I'm worried about people copying some aspects of me, it is also quite literally not possible. You can never 100% duplicate anything. And if you can, then it's just laying on top of itself. And there's no point because you can't separate the two. For you to see like a duplicate separated, there's still a little bit of differentiation. And I know that people think of it as a meaningless platitude to see that you are actually very unique and special, but in a scientific sense, actually you are. Your existence is very important to this reality that we're all a part of. So yeah, I mean, most people they're either aware of this and they dismiss it or they aren't aware, but they think of it as magical thinking. Just remember that magic is unexplained science. Like the iPhone would have made a caveman crash out, right? Like so we just have these really deep understanding of things, and because it kind of leads you to naturally embracing yourself, and that's not something we see in society today, right? Then we just dismiss it. But I am actually trying to kind of offer you guys a more relatable sense that feels scientific, but like I don't want to dismiss the very nurturing aspect that you are extremely important in being alive and being present, right? And the true intelligence, which is oftentimes, unfortunately, not what we see. We like to have differentiated knowledge, which is a form of bondage, remember? But like true intelligence, what it will do is kind of leave you into undifferentiated knowledge. And also, you have your memory of differentiated knowledge. So you have the universal set, right? You will be connected to deeper cosmic truths, despite what the ego leads you to believe sounds smart. So this is where the Purnam mantra comes in to validate this idea. Now, mantras are typically in Sanskrit, so I'm going to walk this through. So first, I'm going to say it in Sanskrit first. I have a lecture already where I sing it with a little Tibetan bowl, so check that one out. So this says Purnamada, Purnamidam, Purnat Purnam Udachyate, Purnashaya Purnamadaya, Purnamiva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So what this means in translated form, it is saying that what is visible is the infinite. So everything you see in your reality is connected with infinite cosmic reality. What you also cannot see is also the infinite. Just because it's not in your perception doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And it doesn't mean that it's also not part of the infinite as well. Out of the infinite being, the finite has come, yet being infinite, only infinite remains. Now, this is very interesting. Out of the infinite being, the finite has come. This is a really jam-packed line here because when you have an infinite being like this, I talked to you guys about the universal field of consciousness. There's also the idea of Brahman, right? Super intelligent consciousness that is all that there ever is in the cosmos into one supreme reality and not expanded into like differentiated existence as we see it today. So out of that, the finite has come. So for example, I am finite, right? Like I am not expanding into the ether forever. I'm going to expand a little bit if I have like a lot of food or something, but that's really about it. But as long as you have skin, hair, a meat suit in general, you're contained. And if you're contained, you're finite. Yet coming from the infinite, only infinite remains. So it's not explicitly saying it, but it's, implicitly saying that infinity as a concept is also a fractal, like self-similar at micro and macro scales. So you actually have infinite information encoded within you. And also, this is discussed in another lecture about how your brain is filtering, not generating, filtering the universal field of consciousness. And so when you are taking away from the infinite and creating little containers, you're creating containers of infinite because the limit does not exist. You, you taking away from infinity also leaves you with just infinity. A really practical example of this, mental health wise, how this helps me is I know a lot of people have heard of things like, you learn to not take things personally when, people are projecting all the time. And that's really great. But even if they weren't projecting and they were saying something really personal to you and it really hurt, right? So if you really view yourself as infinite, and I want to hold on to this because we're going to come back to this full circle at the end of the presentation. But if you are aligned with your most infinite self without ego, without differentiated knowledge, then anything someone does to harm or take away from you doesn't actually take away from your essence. Really, the only thing that can give something power is when you yourself don't know your own. So not only does this mantra actually reveal deep cosmic truths about how reality operates, but to me, I use it as a direct application on how to ensure that my mental health and my power maintain themselves within me and not something outside of me. Okay, so now coming from understanding all of this, I know we talked about quantum coherence as well and dependent origination. So we are going to connect those topics to the concept of quantum entanglement and splitting particles. So what is quantum entanglement? When there are two particles, like a pair of photons or electrons, they become entangled. That means they remain connected even when separated by vast distances. And I believe it was Bell's theorem that was testing this out and it proved it to be true and it freaked scientists out because it really defies this idea of like, wait, how can you affect something when you're super far away or like the time zones are absolutely different, right? So there was this like breakthrough idea that, just because things are really far apart, they feel like they're disconnected. That's how we view it as human beings with our limited perception. Really far away, different time zone, no relevance. Quantum entanglement challenges that. Like when there's a particle in one area that's taken a particular value or spin, the other one changes instantaneously. Now, you can actually also create a quantum entanglement behavior in a lab. I don't know all of the intricacies of it because I am not a quantum physicist, though that'd be so cool. But it can be created, excuse me, by splitting a particle into two. The sum of the properties is known, it'll equal to one, but they're like opposite spins from a spin zero particle. The correlation, like I said before, between these particles is instantaneous, as confirmed by numerous experiments. It appears to transcend space-time, leading physicists to hypothesize about non-locality, which is this idea that everything is extremely interconnected and probably defies this idea of, lagging and shifting just because of time and space being of different values. So naturally, actually, where this led me to start thinking about was with fighting cause and effect. The decision factor doesn't exist in a classical sense. Before measurement, what we know with quantum mechanics is that a system is in a superposition state where both possibilities exist. The act of measurement is what ultimately causes the collapse of the wave function, forcing particles into definitive states, like one being positive one half, other one being negative one half. When one particle is measured, the entire system's wave function collapses and it instantly assigns the other particle's value. There's no evidence to suggest a temporal sequence. The process appears instantaneous and non-local. This is really hard for me. That's why I put that last line there, because I, as a human being, living in linear time was really trying to wrap my mind around how could it be that just because I took a look at something elsewhere took a different shift. Like what made this particle in front of me have a plus one half value? And then why did that one have negative one half? I can get it if the other one does it in reaction to the current one, but I was really unable to, and still am struggling with understanding why is it so instantaneous? Like, is it, the idea that as a human being, I'm very limited in my perception because of, entropy. I can only see change happening over time instead of like all that information of things happening at different states of time collapsed onto one. I don't know. And it just led me to think like why what I'm observing is taking the value that it is. Is that something predetermined? Like how does this particle know it's going to go in this direction or that direction if it's existing in superposition? So if time is just an emergent property of relational changes, and it's the way we understand things, then causality isn't linear. And I believe Buddhist philosophy also just denies cause and effect as an isolated system. So what we perceive as instantaneous might actually be a state of timeless co-arising where both the cause and the effect exist in a mutual interdependent state, which is interesting because we see cause and effect as being like the past or slash present and then the future. So if you're seeing as cause and effect co-arising in a mutual interdependent state, it's very interesting to think about how the past or the present and the future exist simultaneously. Yeah, right here I say I struggle with conceptualizing instantaneous behavior. Our cognition is rooted in linear time thanks to entropy. This is where adopting nonlinear or multidimensional perspectives could help. The only reason we actually have a concept of linear time is because we can see the effects of something in our environment, and it's our way of keeping track. My favorite example is when a forensic scientist is looking like at a dead body, and you can check how long it's been dead because the decay of the body, the entropy of it will give away how much time has gone by. And that's just for, empirical data purposes. But as far as experientially, there's not really a defined for sure construct of time. So let's talk about quantum entanglement and collective consciousness. This is the Unimind from the Buzz Lightyear movie. I just finished watching that. Super fun. These are all the little green men, very connected and vibrating in one way of being and thinking. And collective consciousness is just an idea of a collective, a big group of people or everybody, what their belief systems are and how it can interact with reality. So Tantra teaches us that the observer and the observed are not separate. It is only Maya, the illusion, that makes you believe that there's any separation in our reality. In this view, the quantum collapse isn't just an external event. It's a co-creation between the system and the observer's consciousness, kind of coming back to the quantum entanglement thing when you split a particle, like why is what you saw positive one half or negative one half? It could have been anything, but why did that value take place if it's so instantaneous, right? So in quantum experiments, scientists do try to isolate systems to remove environmental influences like think absolute zero, like cold labs, right? Despite this, complete isolation is impossible. There's always things happening at a level that we can't account for. I mean, even at the most still point, there's still movement. That's what zero the 0 point field is in quantum mechanics. It's just there's an ever so slight vibration happening even at what we perceive to be stillness. Okay, so this was sort of my thought experiment in trying to understand collective consciousness better. So if I am looking at a split particle, just one of them, of the two out of the pair, and I see like either a positive one half or a negative one half, I kind of wondered, based on that bullet point above, that okay, so it's not just an external event. It's not like that was a predetermined role that particle's value took place. It was maybe something within me that made me observe that value as well. So it led me to wonder how much of what we are observing is truly the physical environment, how much of it is our internal belief system. What is it in our consciousness that can have some emitting factor that can have impact on whatever we are taking a look at? And, I didn't want to gaslight myself. So I was just kind of wondering, like, if it's not just me viewing this thing, but let's say we have 100,000 people in a lab viewing one of the pair of this particle. What would that look like? What would they see? If it is our external environment that dominates, meaning that particle that has gotten split, so we can check for quantum entanglement, if that is its superposition is the only thing that matters, then all 100,000 people might see the same result. Like they might all see positive one half because the external context determines the collapse of this wave function. If it's consciousness that dominates, meaning what you see, your individual internal states might lead to divergent perceptions, creating multiple realities for the same event. I wish there was a way I could test this out. I think that would cost me a lot of money, but it would be really interesting to see how much is affected by what people individually believe and what they think. It doesn't even really have to be like a thought about what do I think particles should have the value of. It just means consciousness, what is going on in this vibratory field, this emergent property that exists in our minds that connects us to the cosmos. And then lastly, this is why some spiritual teachings argue that collective beliefs shape a shared reality, while individual beliefs shape your personal reality. I mean, that's pretty intuitive, right? But I think if I link it back to that second bullet point, if you have internal states that, your consciousness, it's all scattered, right? Like we all think very different things, all of us in this chat right now, and you have divergent perceptions, well, it could kind of scatter how reality collapses, whatever. It might lead you to wonder why there can be a push to get strength in numbers for any belief system, right? So that you can kind of solidify and not have like, this idea of a chaotic version of reality, but everyone can agree on one thing. Why would there be such a push for a belief system in society, in government, for everyone to kind of follow one way of thinking? Why would there, maybe be a push from the music industry to give away certain messaging, right? That like everyone is listening to in a room, they're talking about, they're repeating the same phrases again and again. What do these subtler things indicate, and how can they affect collective consciousness and how we shape reality? And it's just something I've been thinking about. I mean, you can go either way with what you seem to believe. I mean, there's no way to, in a scientific method sense, I mean, there's a Herculean amount of effort that you would have to put in to put this to the test. And you would have to assume everyone is being honest as well. And there's also inherently going to be bias in this kind of experimentation because your perception, if it's shifting reality, then we have to somehow make subjectivity objective. So right now, this is kind of like a big question mark into how literally effective it is. But maybe we're asking the wrong question. Maybe if you're trying to be literally effective in answering the question, you're trying to define it in the most objective way. But the realm we're talking about is not one of classical mechanics. We're talking about quantum mechanics. And the realm we're talking about is not the realm of thermodynamics and solidified reality and condensed matter physics. We're talking about the realm of consciousness. Both things have so much bias and so much of this erratic behavior that it's really difficult to deal with. but also why I think there's always a push for people to have one big belief system and make a lot of change that way. It's a lot easier if you can get multiple observers to collapse. It's easy to collapse any reality if you have enough people believing in the same things. In tantric philosophy, remember that vibration precedes manifestation. So if you have a lot of people thinking the same things and they all agree with each other on it, they're more likely to act on that thing, get more support. It'll recursively increase in the desire they have to create a reality because of all this support they're getting, and they feel really jazzed up, right? So it is a lot easier to create exactly the reality you want if you have enough people listening to what you're telling them to do. So I know I mentioned I would talk a little bit about, the gravity of consciousness. And there's like a collective density, right? So while gravity and density are distinct concepts, gravity is a force, density is a property. A denser object will experience a stronger gravitational pull, excuse me, and the gravitational field strength is related to the density of an object. The more dense a belief system is collectively, the more our holographic reality bends or gets this gravitational pull into solidifying into a final form based on belief, based on belief. And belief standalone doesn't really mean much, right? If you take action on belief, then you can really alter things very, very quickly. And so that's why I was kind of calling this like a gravity of consciousness, right? So if density is this property, like how much do you really believe in something happening? And how much do you reaffirm that to yourself? How long of a time do you do it for? What's the frequency and what's the time length? So you kind of develop a level of density to a certain mindset. And then you have enough people also feeling this way. So the density, the property of a lot of people's individual consciousness now forms a collective consciousness, which then kind of forms a gravity of consciousness. And if we remember everything we've been sort of taking a look at before, that, non-locality. We're not really actually touching or interacting with things, or reality is not as solidified as it seems. It's just really deterministic and solidified as per human perception in a human lifetime. But in actuality, anything is technically possible. So if you, really want to take it a step further, we do affect this physical reality a lot. It's not going to be something instantaneous like turning a table lamp into like a bowl of pudding or something like that, right? But it is a lot easier to maneuver things very quickly and non-linear, linear way, I'm not quite sure, but it also really makes sense why we have such a push in society, in reality. Like there's fun ways to do it and not fun ways to do it. We have concerts and we have cults, right? So this reality that we have when it's not externally extremely like 100% solidified, and if you're really engaging in scientific thinking, there are no absolutes. There's nothing that's 100%. There's always the smallest ever so slight chance that something can shift. And if the harder something is, the more you want something to alter, the more you would want to convince a group of people of something altering. And the best way to do it is very slowly over time so people don't think of it as a massive shift from within, because human beings, you could call us lazy, or you could say we're taking the path of least resistance, whatever feels right to you. But when you have change happening really slowly, it is the best way, that property of density, to take on a higher and higher value because you are somatically integrating with that. It is time, yes, it represents itself through entropy, but it also represents itself through somatic integration. Like if somebody tells you like you are beautiful just today, it's a nice compliment. But if you heard it every day for several years, there would really be this internal belief, right? That that is something that's a part of you. So little things happening frequently over long periods of time can create great shifts in different eras of us being alive. And it shows up in society in different behaviors. And you can take that as you will, but I think you guys know where I'm kind of getting with that here. So with everything I have shared, what can you do with this information right now? Understand that self-recognition is the ultimate goal, knowing that you are the infinite. Again, we will be touching at that at the end of this presentation. So we have this constant desire to chase after enlightenment. I mean, maybe there's a reason you guys are on this call. Like what do you want to learn, right? What do you want to achieve as if it's something external? You want to pursue a sense of superiority, goal after goal. Once you get this, you want to do that. And once that's done, you could do this. And then, you get this feeling that you're trapped within this. I should have said a loop, not binary, sorry, but reward, punishment, and seeking the meaning of life and trying to define it in a very cerebral, intellectual way. Um, but yeah, I mean, we are more concerned with looking like things got done rather than if they really did get done. So in society, when we're like wanting to look super duper productive, very simple example, right? You want to look like you're productive and you did something that's a change, but a lot of what we see is mostly performative, and a hustle culture in its own way also is very performative, but you might not have actually gotten something done. And this is the most ego soul crushing thing for me. Someone had told me this actually as a line to me, and it really hurt me, but I'm using it in a presentation slide now. So, hey, they were right. Just because you suffered and spent a lot of time on something doesn't mean you had meaningful impact, right? Suffering and time spent a lot of times is people's way of saying, hey, look, I got so much done, or look at how hard I work, like, whew, all of this kind of stuff. But like, what is the true meaningful impact that your, pain had, right? Like, also, I would like to point out one of the four pillars of Tantra is, well, I'll name them, all four of them, Artha, Kama, Moksha, Dharma. So Arth means resources and wealth. You should not go broke doing what you love, right? That's a simple way of looking at it. Kama is pleasure. You should enjoy what you're doing. When you're happy and ethically selfish, everybody around you benefits because you're doing your best work. You're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And dharma is your unique soul's purpose in this reality, which leads you to moksha, your soul's exit from samsara. Again, that hell loop, reward, punishment, stuck constantly in time. And like, they go into talking about reincarnation and things like that. Well, it's not really the flex you think it is to constantly be in pain. Actually, when you're a lot of people I see, the energetic pipelining is so inefficient. Real intelligence, in my opinion, feel free to debate, but it's efficiency, right? And when you are fulfilling your cosmic function, right? Like what I'm doing with these talks, like loving the cosmos, loving consciousness, learning about it, it fuels me up. And naturally, when you are in line with this, you will be so happy and you'll naturally want to talk about it, and everybody else will, listen. And when we are in line, we actually don't need to feel this sense of survivor's guilt that I think a lot of people have. There's this pressure almost to have this opinion of everything that exists in the world 24/7 and to carry the weight of the world all on your shoulders, which could kind of be seen as a little capitalistic, honestly. Well, everyone, if they're fulfilling ideally their cosmic function and what they're supposed to be doing, they feel pleasure and joy, they have resources from what they're doing in life, then we can all contribute collectively to one another. We can all contribute to creating a very utopian society and achieving unity of consciousness rather than an entropy of consciousness, which is what we tend to see today. My favorite quote that I've been hearing, there was never a lock on the door. This kind of goes into bullet point number two, when people are chasing after something and everyone's like opening this door, like, let me in, like, let me work super hard and pick this lock and like figure out a way to open this door. And all of a sudden I'll be realized, um, yeah, sorry to say, there was never really a lock on this door. Actually, a lot of the times, whether we realize it or not, we self-impose the lock. We've been conditioned for a reward punishment cycle constantly, and it doesn't have to come from any religious belief system or anything puritanical, colonial, whatever you want to call it, from like the past, right? Like those effects, the ramifications exist within us today. Like, when you feel antsy, I've felt antsy in my unemployment period. Like, am I doing enough? Am I getting things done? Like, I don't look like blah blah blah. And I just never realized that what I'm looking for externally, if I keep looking for it externally, I'm never going to get the satisfaction because nothing external can be merged into my internal. It's really inside out, not outside in. We're so scared of human being. It's so sad. We assume that if we're in our quantum coherence of consciousness, in our infinite form, which will be very deeply discussed in our next talk. Now, we talked about Burnham, the infinite. There's also the Burnham that exists in your consciousness as well. Stay tuned for that. But who told you this story? Where does it come from? Sometimes when you ask people, if you didn't have this job, what would you do? And they're like, what? I'm going to do nothing? Whoa, 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 whoa. It doesn't mean you're going to do nothing. Where does this narrative come from? That if you were stripped away of obligations that you have to do, that you've been conditioned to do since birth, that absolutely nothing will happen? Like, there's a lot you can do. You can create art. You can pick up a hobby. You can have conversations. Like it's really deep. Like when you really think about it, we have this story that you are doing nothing when you are not following other orders. Crazy, right? I mean, when you're doing something, can you honestly tell yourself who you're doing it for? What are you truly doing? What is this something? And I'm literally talking about corporate America because that is the most immediate link, right? The greatest act of human doing is actually by human being. You don't sit idly by just because you're being yourself. Why, what, who created this narrative? But no one advocates for human being. Because, well, you would be in line with your cosmic function now, wouldn't you? And you'd be happy. And you would know that you were a conscious creator of this reality yourself. If you knew that, then you wouldn't be wrapped up in the corporate world, 3D reality, Maya, where other people decide your reality for you. Another way to think about this too, like the best, most effective way is not top down, but it's side to side, right? Like if somebody tells you what to do, like your boss, right? You'll be like, okay, well, that's my boss. They tell me what to do. Like they want me to work, blah, blah, blah. But if it's your friends, it's your peers, right? Your partner saying like you're not physically like really doing enough. It can make you feel that peer pressure is enough. We really want to fit in. We want allyship. It makes sense. I do too. Who wants to be completely by themselves? It's an inversely proportional relationship, right? The more you're individualistic and like trying to find yourself, the less you have community support. The more you follow what everyone tells you to do, the more you have community support. It's really unfortunate, but this is why we have conversations like this. You are beyond connected to deeper cosmic truths and more than what your suffering is in this reality. The greatest cosmic joke was that there was never anywhere to really go, right? What you were looking for was never out there, but always in here. And I know that sounds really nice. We can balance both the Shiv and the Shakti energies here. We can talk about the physical defined scientific structures and forces that enable us to understand that, oh, we are one jewel in infinite jewels, and each jewel has an access to all of it. In a hologram, we are one slice of the hologram. We have access to the whole picture. We have the infinite within us. So now you have this more both esoteric scientific way of thinking about it, and then you have like my emotional approach to looking at it. We've balanced both of these forces. The answer is always inside of you. It always has been. But where do we see in society that there's any encouragement of this behavior of understanding yourself? People can't be by themselves. They're not taught how to do that. They're taught how to follow the crowd, right? And then that's cool, right? You can follow whatever you want, but did you ever take a second to think about what it is that you're following and why? And when you do it by yourself, it just feels like if you're alone, you did something wrong. But oftentimes, being in the void is the most right thing you can do for yourself. It's the place you find the most cosmic truths when you're in the absolute stillness. More on that in the next talk. And on that note, what do you have to look forward to next? The discussion of Shunya and Purnam. Purnam is the infinite, Shunya is the void. They're complementary forces, both at a cosmic scale, but also how it emerges in our consciousness and how we can align with quantum coherence and build a wonderful, beautiful society by combining both cosmology's understanding with our internal consciousness. So stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for attending this talk. So I have been unemployed for several months. I am trying to open up I've created a research lab. It's shivohamlabs.com. I will enter that in the chat and in the YouTube description. But if you feel that this was of any value, of my other lectures are of any value, excuse me, then feel free to donate. It definitely helps me make this a reality and make this a career because I think we can really do great things when we come together and talk about these deeper topics. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.